Remember the towering cakes church ladies carried into Christmas potlucks? Those architectural marvels requiring 3 days of preparation that silenced entire fellowship halls?
Dressing a little makes her feel and consequently look more charming. Even the table takes on a special air.
Between 1945 and 1985, denominational cookbooks documented 30 specific cakes ruling every church Christmas social. By 1975, 20 appeared regularly. These have vanished from our churches. Today, most churches make 2. These weren't simple layer cakes. They were edible monuments to patience modern bakers abandoned. Tonight we are bringing all 30 before the last church ladies who remember are dying. Walk into any Southern church Christmas social in 1955, and you'd find lane cake positioned like royalty on the dessert table. This towering 4-layer creation cost $3 to make and fed 24 people with cake, so rich one slice satisfied completely. Church ladies made lane cake 3 days before the social, baking layers on day 1, making bourbon-soaked filling on day 2, assembling and frosting on day 3. The filling required 12 egg yolks, 1 cup of butter, raisins, pecans, and enough bourbon to preserve it for weeks. The assembly demanded steady hands and patience. Each layer had to be perfectly level, the filling spread evenly without soaking through delicate cake. The final white frosting, boiled until glossy, covered everything in snowy elegance. The labor was immense, but Lane Cake announced that your church took Christmas seriously enough to invest days in celebration. Lady Baltimore cake represented refined elegance transplanted from Charleston society into church fellowship halls nationwide. This 3-layer white cake with fig nut filling cost $2 and fed 18 people with sophisticated sweetness that distinguished it from simpler church desserts. Church ladies beat egg whites by hand for 20 minutes, creating the snowy frosting that covered layers filled with chopped figs, raisins, and pecans. The filling had to be made the day before to allow flavors to meld, while the cake layers required precise timing to achieve perfect texture. The assembly required careful handling. The delicate white layers crumbled easily if handled roughly, and the sticky fig filling had to be spread with gentle touch to avoid tearing the tender crumb. The name itself announced sophistication. Serving Lady Baltimore cake meant your church understood elegant entertaining, not just feeding crowds. Scripture cake turned Bible verses into baking instructions, creating cakes that taught Sunday school lessons while feeding Christmas crowds. This spice-heavy cake cost $1 and fed 12 people with cake that sparked conversations about faith and tradition while demonstrating that Scripture applied to every aspect of daily life. Church ladies followed recipes listing only Bible verses, Jeremiah 6:20 for sweet cane, sugar, Judges 5:25 for butter, Isaiah 10:14 for eggs. Children learned to look up verses while mothers measured ingredients, making cake preparation into religious education that connected kitchen work to spiritual formation. The dense, dark cake improved with age, lasting weeks when wrapped properly. The spices, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg from various verses, intensified during storage, creating complexity that rewarded patience. Churches made scripture cake in November, letting it mellow until Christmas, when slices appeared at every social, each bite a reminder that faith nourished body and soul simultaneously. Burnt sugar cake required courage and timing most modern bakers lack. This caramel-flavored creation cost $2 and fed 16 people with cake that tasted like sophisticated candy, transforming ordinary white sugar into complex flavor through controlled burning that bordered on disaster. Church ladies burned sugar in cast-iron skillets, watching carefully as white crystals turned amber, then deep brown. Too soon meant no flavor. Too late meant bitter disaster. The burnt sugar dissolved in boiling water created syrup that flavored both cake and frosting. The dramatic caramel color made burnt sugar cake visually striking on dessert tables. Children who ate it remembered the sophisticated bitterness-sweetness combination for decades, associating that specific flavor with church Christmas celebrations. Despite its name, Japanese fruitcake was pure Southern invention. This three-layer spice cake with coconut lemon filling cost $3 and fed 20 people with exotic flavors that seemed worldly to small-town congregations who'd never traveled beyond their counties. Church ladies made 2 white layers and 1 spice layer, stacking them with lemon coconut filling between. The filling required cooking lemon juice, sugar, and grated coconut until thick, then spreading it warm so it soaked into cake layers, creating moisture that bound everything together. The grated coconut had to be fresh, requiring cracking whole coconuts and hand-grating the meat until fingers cramped. This labor took hours, but created texture that packaged coconut couldn't match. The combination of spice and citrus created complexity that made this cake memorable. Churches served Japanese fruitcake to demonstrate culinary sophistication, proving small-town church ladies could create flavors rivaling city bakeries. 5 cakes down, and the pattern emerges. Multi-day preparation, precise timing, specialized techniques.
Now we just need to slowly fold in the flour, dear.
Lane cake's bourbon filling, Lady Baltimore's beaten egg whites, scripture cake's Bible verses, burnt sugar's courage, Japanese cake's complexity. Church ladies weren't just baking, they were demonstrating mastery. 25 more cakes reveal the complete tradition. Robert E. Lee cake stood as the ultimate expression of Southern church baking prowess. This towering 12-layer creation cost $5 and fed 30 people with cake so impressive that making it established a church lady's reputation for years. Each layer had to be perfectly even and exactly the same thickness, requiring skill that came only from years of practice. The lemon-orange filling between layers required cooking until thick enough to stay put without soaking the delicate layers. Assembly happened on the 3rd day, with each layer carefully positioned and filled. The final frosting, a boiled white icing, had to be beaten to exact consistency, then applied while still warm enough to spread but cool enough not to melt. Churches served Robert E. Lee cake only at the most important Christmas socials. The cake's height, often 10 inches tall, made it impossible to ignore on dessert tables, and women who successfully made it earned respect that extended beyond baking into church leadership. Applesauce cake solved the problem of creating moist cake that lasted through week-long Christmas celebrations. This spice-heavy creation cost $1 and fed 15 people with cake that actually improved after several days of storage. Church ladies made applesauce cake with home-canned applesauce from autumn's harvest, creating connection between seasons and demonstrating year-round planning. The applesauce kept the cake moist, while spices, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, allspice, created complexity that developed over days. Methodist women's circles particularly favored applesauce cake because it transported well to shut-ins during Christmas week. The cake's durability meant it could be baked Monday and still taste fresh Friday, making it practical for churches delivering dozens of plates to elderly members who couldn't attend Christmas services. Fresh coconut cake announced serious commitment to excellence. This 3-layer white cake, covered entirely in fresh coconut, cost $4 and fed 20 people with cake that looked like snow-covered celebration. 1 coconut yielded about 3 cups of grated meat, enough to cover 1 cake if applied generously. The cake itself had to be perfect white. Any yellow tint showed through the coconut covering and announced careless baking. The frosting needed exact consistency to hold coconut without sliding off, requiring boiled icing beaten to precise stiffness. Baptist churches particularly favored fresh coconut cake for Christmas Eve socials. The pure white appearance symbolized purity and celebration simultaneously. Women who made fresh coconut cake from scratch earned recognition that extended beyond the kitchen into church governance. Mahogany cake's deep reddish-brown color came from a specific ratio of cocoa and red food coloring that church ladies guarded like secrets. This three-layer creation cost $2 and fed 18 people with cake that looked expensive despite humble ingredients. Church ladies mixed cocoa powder with red food coloring in precise amounts to achieve the signature mahogany color. Too much cocoa made it brown, too much red made it garish. The cake had to be moist but sturdy enough to support thick cream cheese frosting without compressing. The frosting required softened cream cheese beaten with butter and powdered sugar until fluffy. This combination was expensive in the 1950s, making mahogany cake a splurge cake that churches served only at Christmas. Presbyterian women's associations particularly favored mahogany cake because its sophisticated appearance suggested refinement and taste. The deep color photographed beautifully, making it popular for church Christmas programs where photos documented the celebration. Women who mastered the exact color ratio shared it only with trusted protégés, maintaining competitive advantage in church baking circles. Scripture. Spice cake represented the intersection of faith and baking skill. This dense, dark cake cost $1 and fed 12 people while teaching Bible verses through ingredient lists that referenced specific passages. Church ladies made this cake with children present, having them look up verses while ingredients were measured. 1 Kings 4:22 provided flour measurements, Judges 5:25 specified butter, Jeremiah 6:20 indicated sweet cane. The process turned baking into Bible study, making cake preparation educational and spiritual simultaneously. The boiled icing required cooking sugar and water to thread stage 235 degrees, then pouring it over beaten egg whites while beating constantly. This technique required 2 people or exceptional coordination, making boiled icing a demonstration of either cooperation or individual skill. Lutheran churches particularly embraced scripture cake because it aligned with their emphasis on Bible knowledge. Sunday school teachers made these cakes with their classes before Christmas, creating memories that connected faith, food, and fellowship in ways that children remembered for lifetimes. Rehook 10, cakes down, 1/3 complete. Notice the escalating complexity, 12-layer assembly, fresh coconut grating, precise color ratios, boiled icings requiring exact temperatures, Bible verses as recipes. Church ladies were chemists, theologians, and artists simultaneously. 20 more cakes reveal why daughters couldn't replicate what mothers made look effortless. Italian cream cake became the ultimate church social showpiece during the 1960s when cream cheese frosting gained popularity. This 3-layer creation cost $4 and fed 24 people with cake so rich that small slices satisfied completely. Church ladies made Italian cream cake over 2 days, baking layers on day 1, making frosting on day 2. The cake itself required separating eggs and beating whites to stiff peaks before folding them into batter containing buttermilk, pecans, and coconut. This technique created extraordinarily tender crumb that compressed easily if handled roughly. The cream cheese frosting had to be made with softened, not melted, cream cheese beaten with butter until fluffy, before adding powdered sugar. Too soft cream cheese created runny frosting that slid off layers, while too cold cream cheese created lumpy frosting that tore delicate cake when spread. Assembly required patience and gentle handling. Each layer had to be positioned carefully, frosting spread with light touch to avoid compressing the tender crumb. The finished cake needed refrigeration, making it impractical for churches without adequate cooling space. Hummingbird cake swept through Southern churches during the 1970s, becoming so popular that some congregations served nothing else at Christmas socials. This banana pineapple spice cake cost $3 and fed 20 people with cake that tasted tropical despite winter celebrations. Church ladies made hummingbird cake with canned crushed pineapple and overripe bananas, creating moisture that kept cake fresh for days. The combination of banana, pineapple, pecans, and spices created complexity that seemed more sophisticated than ingredients suggested. The cake required no creaming of butter and sugar, just mixing everything together, making it accessible to less experienced bakers. The cream cheese frosting made hummingbird cake special. Thick, tangy frosting balanced the sweet cake, while chopped pecans pressed into frosting sides created textural interest and visual appeal. The frosting had to be thick enough to hold pecans without them sliding off, requiring precise butter-to-cream cheese ratios that experienced bakers knew by feel. Caramel cake separated master bakers from amateurs through its requirement for perfectly cooked caramel frosting. This three-layer creation cost $2 and fed 16 people with cake that tasted like sophisticated candy. Church ladies made caramel frosting by cooking sugar, butter, and cream to exactly 238 degrees soft ball stage, then beating it while it cooled to spreading consistency. This narrow temperature window meant success or failure happened in seconds. Too cool, and the frosting never set properly, staying sticky forever. Too hot, and it hardened into candy before spreading, requiring reheating and starting over. The timing required experience and confidence. Experienced bakers could tell by sight and sound when caramel reached proper temperature, but beginners needed thermometers and luck. The frosting had to be spread immediately once it reached spreading consistency. Hesitation meant hardened frosting and ruined cake. Episcopal women's guilds particularly favored caramel cake because its difficulty created natural hierarchy among bakers. Women who consistently produced perfect caramel frosting earned respect that extended into church governance. The cake became a test. Could you handle the pressure of timing, critical cooking, while managing conversation and maintaining composure? Blackberry jam cake connected summer's harvest to winter's celebration. This dark, spice-heavy cake cost $2 and fed 15 people with cake that tasted like preserved memories of August berries picked during the hottest days of summer. Church ladies made blackberry jam in July, processing berries into preserves that would flavor Christmas cakes 5 months later. The jam had to be seedless. Seeds in cake created unpleasant texture, requiring straining that doubled preparation time but ensured smooth cake crumb. 1 cup of jam per cake meant summer's labor directly enabled winter's celebration. The cake itself was dense and dark, heavy with spices that complemented blackberry's tartness. Cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, and allspice created complexity, while buttermilk provided tang that balanced jam's sweetness. The cake improved with age, lasting weeks when wrapped properly and stored cool. Devil's food cake created theological tension in churches that questioned whether celebrating devils anything was appropriate. This intensely chocolate cake cost $2 and fed 18 people with cake so rich and dark it seemed almost sinful. Church ladies defended devil's food cake by pairing it with 7-minute frosting, the name referencing the 7 days of creation, turning devilish cake into theological statement about redemption. The frosting required beating egg whites, sugar, and corn syrup over boiling water for exactly 7 minutes, creating glossy white peaks that covered dark cake in visual metaphor of light overcoming darkness. The cake itself required cocoa powder, coffee, and buttermilk, creating depth of chocolate flavor that made it distinctly different from simple chocolate cake. Rehook 15 cakes down, halfway through. You've witnessed escalating complexity. Caramel requiring split-second timing, jam cake connecting seasons, theological debates over devil's food. These weren't just desserts. They were tests of skill, demonstrations of planning, and statements of faith. Traditional pound cake, 1 pound each of butter, sugar, eggs, and flour, represented baking fundamentals mastered through years of practice. This dense, buttery cake cost $3 and fed 20 people with cake that lasted weeks and improved with age. Church ladies made pound cake without leavening beyond air beaten into butter and eggs. This meant creaming butter and sugar for 20 minutes by hand, creating mixture so light and fluffy it almost doubled in volume. The eggs had to be added one at a time, beating thoroughly after each addition. Christmas socials featured multiple pound cakes, allowing direct comparison, the finest texture, the most even baking, the best butter flavor. These distinctions mattered in communities where baking skill translated into social capital and demonstrated the kind of attention to detail the churches valued in all areas of life. Fresh apple stack cake represented Appalachian tradition transplanted into churches nationwide. This labor-intensive creation required making 6 to 8 thin cake layers and cooking down pounds of fresh apples into thick filling, taking 3 full days and costing $4 to feed 24 people. Church ladies made stacked cake layers like cookies, stiff dough rolled thin and baked on cake pans. Each layer had to be exactly the same size and thickness, requiring skill that came only from repeated practice. The layers baked quickly, 8 to 10 minutes, but making 8 layers meant standing at the oven for over an hour, rolling and baking in continuous cycles. The apple filling required peeling, coring, and slicing 10 pounds of apples, then cooking them with sugar and spices until thick enough to stay between layers without soaking through. This cooking took hours of stirring to prevent scorching, creating filling dark and thick as apple butter. The filling had to cool completely before assembly to prevent melting the cake layers. Assembly happened on day 3, with each layer spread with filling and stacked carefully. The assembled cake had to sit for 24 hours before serving, allowing filling to soften layers slightly and flavors to meld. This aging was essential. Fresh stacked cake tasted dry, and the layers didn't hold together properly. This is the cake requiring 87 steps that the hook promised would humble you. From measuring flour to final assembly, every action counted. Church ladies who successfully made apple stack cake earned legendary status because the cake's difficulty made success rare and impressive. Pineapple upside-down cake brought tropical glamour to church Christmas socials during the 1950s when canned pineapple represented exotic luxury. This dramatic cake cost $3 and fed 12 people with cake that looked like professional bakery work despite being made in home kitchens. Church ladies made pineapple upside-down cake in cast-iron skillets, melting butter and brown sugar in the bottom before arranging pineapple rings and maraschino cherries in precise patterns. The arrangement mattered. Sloppy placement showed when the cake was inverted, announcing careless work. Experienced bakers created geometric patterns with pineapple and cherries that looked intentional and artistic. The cake batter had to be exactly right consistency. Too thin, and it seeped under the fruit, creating soggy bottom. Too thick, and it didn't spread evenly, leaving gaps. The batter poured over fruit had to be spread gently to avoid disturbing the careful arrangement underneath. The inversion required courage and timing. The cake had to cool slightly. Hot cake fell apart when inverted, but not too long, or the caramelized sugar hardened and glued cake to the pan. Experienced bakers knew the exact moment to invert, placing serving plate over skillet and flipping quickly before the sugar set. Lutheran churches particularly favored pineapple upside-down cake because its dramatic presentation created memorable moments when the cake was revealed. The golden caramelized pineapple and bright red cherries announced celebration and abundance, making it perfect for Christmas socials where visual impact mattered as much as taste. Red velvet cake's origins sparked debates in church kitchens across America. This dramatic red cake with white frosting cost $4 and fed 20 people with cake that looked almost too beautiful to eat. Church ladies argued about proper red velvet technique. Some insisted on beet juice for color. Others used red food coloring. And purists claimed only a specific ratio of cocoa and vinegar created authentic color. The debates became heated, with women defending their methods as the only correct approach and dismissing alternatives as inauthentic. The cake required precise chemistry. Buttermilk, vinegar, and cocoa reacted to create reddish color naturally, while food coloring intensified it to the dramatic red that made the cake famous. The reaction required exact measurements and proper mixing technique. Too much cocoa made the cake brown despite food coloring, while too much acid created coarse texture. The cream cheese frosting had to be perfectly white to contrast with red cake. Any yellowing from butter or off-white cream cheese ruined the visual impact. The frosting needed exact consistency. Too soft, and it slid off layers. Too stiff, and it tore delicate cake when spread. Catholic churches embraced red velvet cake for Christmas because the red and white colors symbolized the blood and purity of Christ. The theological symbolism made the cake appropriate for religious celebration, while its dramatic appearance made it memorable. Women who mastered red velvet cake that achieved perfect color, moist texture, and stunning presentation earned recognition that extended beyond baking into church social circles, where aesthetic sense mattered as much as cooking skill. Sock-it-to-me cake represented 1970s church ladies embracing modern convenience while maintaining homemade standards. This bundt cake, made with cake mix, cost $2 and fed 16 people with cake that tasted homemade despite starting with a box. Church ladies defended sock-it-to-me cake against purists who claimed that using cake mix wasn't real baking. The defenders argued that adding sour cream, extra eggs, and homemade cinnamon nut filling transformed boxed mix into something genuinely homemade. The debate revealed generational divides. Older women insisted on from-scratch baking, while younger women embraced convenience that allowed working mothers to contribute to church socials. The cake's name came from Laugh In, the television show, making it feel contemporary and relevant. Church ladies who made sock-it-to-me cake demonstrated awareness of popular culture while maintaining baking traditions. The name itself sparked controversy in conservative churches where television was viewed skeptically and secular culture kept at distance. The cinnamon nut filling swirled through the cake, created visual interest when sliced, making each piece look marbled and professional. The filling had to be distributed evenly. Too much in one area created soggy spots, while insufficient swirling left plain cake that disappointed. Methodist churches particularly embraced sock-it-to-me cake because it represented practical adaptation to changing times. The cake acknowledged that women increasingly worked outside homes and needed efficient ways to contribute to church life while maintaining standards of homemade food that demonstrated care and commitment to community. 20 cakes down, 10 remaining. You've witnessed the complete spectrum: traditional pound cakes, fundamentals, stack cakes, 87 steps, red velvet's chemistry, sock-it-to-me's controversy. Church ladies navigated tradition and modernity, theology and technique simultaneously. These final 10 cakes reveal the peak of church baking mastery. 7-layer coconut cake represented the absolute peak of church lady baking ambition. This towering creation cost $6 and fed 30 people with cake so impressive that making it established a woman's reputation for years. Church ladies baked 7 thin layers over 2 days because ovens couldn't accommodate more than 3 or 4 pans simultaneously. Each layer had to be perfectly even and exactly the same thickness. Variations created lopsided cakes that announced amateur work. The layers had to cool completely before assembly, or they cracked when handled. The coconut filling between layers required cooking milk, sugar, and fresh grated coconut until thick enough to stay put without soaking layers. This filling had to be made in large batches. 7 layers required substantial filling and cooked carefully to prevent scorching. The filling cooled to room temperature before assembly to prevent melting the delicate layers. Assembly happened on day 3, with each layer carefully positioned and filled. The process required patience and steady hands. Rushing created sliding layers that had to be disassembled and restarted. The final frosting, boiled white icing, covered the entire cake before being coated with additional fresh coconut. The finished cake stood over 8 inches tall, creating architectural presence on dessert tables that made it impossible to ignore. Churches served 7-layer coconut cake only at the most important Christmas celebrations, Christmas Eve services, annual church dinners, pastor appreciation events. Women who successfully made 7-layer coconut cake earned legendary status. The cake's difficulty meant that only the most skilled and patient bakers attempted it, and successful execution proved mastery of every baking fundamental: even layers, proper filling consistency, steady assembly, perfect frosting. The cake represented the ultimate expression of church lady baking culture: time-intensive, skill-demanding, visually impressive, and created specifically for communal celebration rather than family consumption. Traditional fruitcake sparked more controversy than any other church Christmas cake. This dense, alcohol-soaked creation cost $8 and lasted for months, with some church ladies claiming their fruitcakes improved over years of aging. Church ladies made fruitcake in October, allowing 2 months for aging before Christmas. The cake required pounds of candied fruit, nuts, and dried fruit mixed into minimal batter. The fruit and nuts held together by just enough cake to bind them. The mixing alone took an hour, ensuring even distribution of ingredients throughout the dense batter. The baking required low, slow heat, 275 degrees for 3 hours, with pans of water in the oven to prevent drying. The cakes had to be watched carefully because the high sugar content meant they could burn suddenly despite low temperature. The aging process defined fruitcake quality. Church ladies wrapped baked cakes in cheesecloth, soaked in brandy, rum, or bourbon, then wrapped again in foil and stored in cool places. Every week, they unwrapped the cakes and brushed on more alcohol, repeating this process for 8 weeks. The alcohol preserved the cake while creating complex flavors that developed over time. Baptist churches debated fruitcake's alcohol content more than other denominations, with some congregations banning alcohol-soaked versions entirely, while others argued that the alcohol cooked off or served only preservative purposes. The debates became heated, revealing theological divisions within congregations about alcohol consumption and whether ends justified means. Methodist women often made both alcoholic and non-alcoholic versions, labeling them clearly to allow individual choice. This compromise satisfied both sides while creating additional work for bakers who had to track 2 separate aging processes. The cake's density meant that thin slices satisfied, making fruitcake economical despite high initial cost. One fruitcake could serve 50 people when sliced properly, making it practical for large church gatherings. Angel food cake represented purity and technical perfection. This ethereally light cake cost $3 and fed 16 people with cake so delicate it seemed almost spiritual. Church ladies made angel food cake by beating a dozen egg whites to stiff peaks by hand, a process taking 20 minutes of constant beating. The whites had to reach exact consistency, stiff enough to hold peaks, but not dry and grainy. This narrow window required experience to recognize, and overbeating meant starting over with new eggs, The flour and sugar had to be sifted together multiple times. Some recipes specified 7 siftings, creating mixture so light it almost floated. This sifted mixture, folded into beaten whites, required gentle touch and patience. Too vigorous folding deflated the whites, creating dense cake instead of the characteristic light texture. The baking required ungreased tube pans. Grease prevented the cake from climbing pan sides as it rose. The cake had to cool inverted, hanging upside down for hours until completely cool. This inversion prevented collapse as the delicate structure set. The removal from the pan required running a knife around edges and tube, then inverting onto a plate and hoping the cake released cleanly. Sometimes it didn't, creating disasters that meant starting over entirely. Pentecostal churches particularly favored angel food cake because its white color and light texture symbolized purity and holiness. The cake's difficulty meant that successful execution demonstrated not just skill, but also the kind of patience and attention to detail that churches valued in spiritual life. Women who consistently produced perfect angel food cakes earned reputations for precision and reliability that extended beyond baking into church governance and leadership roles. Gingerbread cake brought spicy warmth to church Christmas celebrations. This dark, molasses-heavy cake cost $1 and fed 15 people with cake that tasted like concentrated Christmas. Church ladies made gingerbread with molasses, ginger, cinnamon, cloves, and black pepper, creating spice combinations that varied by region and family tradition. The debates over proper spice ratios became heated, with women defending their proportions as superior and dismissing alternatives as too mild or too aggressive. The cake improved dramatically when served warm with lemon sauce or whipped cream. Church ladies timed baking so gingerbread emerged from ovens just before serving, filling fellowship halls with spicy aroma that announced Christmas more effectively than any decoration. The warm cake with cold cream created temperature contrast that made the dessert memorable. The molasses created moisture that kept gingerbread fresh for days, making it practical for churches that needed desserts lasting through week-long Christmas celebrations. The cake could be baked Monday and still taste fresh Friday, making it ideal for delivering to shut-ins throughout Christmas week. Lutheran churches particularly embraced gingerbread because its European origins connected to Lutheran heritage. The spice-forward flavor profile reflected Northern European baking traditions that Lutheran immigrants brought to America and maintained through generations. The cake's simplicity, no frosting, no filling, no elaborate decoration, made it accessible to less experienced bakers while still allowing for individual expression through spice variations. This democratic nature meant more women could contribute impressive desserts to church socials, creating inclusive celebration rather than competitive showcase. The warm spices also made gingerbread appropriate for cold weather, with churches serving it at events from Thanksgiving through New Year, making it the most frequently made church cake during the entire holiday season. Pumpkin cake roll represented 1970s church ladies mastering new techniques while maintaining traditional flavors. This impressive creation cost $3 and fed 12 people with cake that looked professionally made, despite being produced in home kitchens. Church ladies made pumpkin cake roll by baking thin cake in jelly roll pans, then rolling it while warm around towels to set the shape. The cake had to be rolled immediately. Waiting meant cracked cake that couldn't be rolled without breaking. This timing-critical step separated experienced bakers from beginners who hesitated and created disasters. The cream cheese filling had to be exactly right consistency. Too soft, and it squished out the ends when rolled. Too stiff, and it tore the delicate cake. The filling went on cooled, unrolled cake, which was then re-rolled without the towel, creating spiral that showed when sliced. Chocolate sheet cake represented democratic church baking, simple enough for beginners, yet delicious enough to satisfy everyone. This large, single-layer cake cost $2 and fed 40 people, making it the most economical church dessert. Church ladies made chocolate sheet cake directly in the pan it was served from, eliminating the complexity of layer assembly and fancy frosting. The cake baked in large sheet pans, creating thin, moist cake that cooked quickly and evenly. The simplicity meant even inexperienced bakers could contribute impressive desserts to church socials. The frosting went on while the cake was still warm, creating fudgy topping that soaked slightly into the cake. Baptist churches particularly embraced chocolate sheet cake because its simplicity meant more women could contribute to potlucks, creating inclusive community rather than competitive showcase. The cake's large size meant one woman could feed 40 people, making it practical for churches with limited number of bakers. The cake's reliability made it the default choice for last-minute needs. When someone forgot to make dessert for Wednesday night supper, chocolate sheet cake could be mixed, baked, frosted, and served within 90 minutes, saving social events from dessertless embarrassment. Sour cream pound cake elevated traditional pound cake through one ingredient addition that created superior moisture and tang. This variation cost $4 and fed 20 people with cake that stayed fresh longer than traditional versions. The debates revealed generational and theological divides about tradition versus progress. The sour cream created tender crumb and extended freshness, with properly wrapped sour cream pound cake staying moist for 2 weeks. This longevity made it practical for churches that needed desserts lasting through extended Christmas celebrations or for delivery to shut-ins throughout the season. The cake required the same careful creaming and mixing as traditional pound cake, but the sour cream addition made it slightly more forgiving. The moisture from sour cream meant that minor overmixing didn't create tough cake as readily as in traditional versions, making it more accessible to less experienced bakers. The cake maintained pound cake's essential character while improving its qualities, demonstrating the kind of progressive conservatism that characterized Presbyterian theology. The side-by-side tasting sparked discussions about tradition, progress, and whether improvement justified change. German chocolate cake swept through American churches during the 1960s. This 3-layer creation cost $5 and fed 24 people with cake that combined chocolate, coconut, and pecans in ways that seemed exotic. The cake wasn't German, but named after Samuel German, who created the chocolate. The coconut pecan frosting required cooking evaporated milk, sugar, egg yolks, butter, and vanilla until thick, then stirring in coconut and pecans. Too thick, and it became grainy and difficult to spread. The frosting went only between layers and on top, leaving sides bare. This partial frosting technique meant the cake's chocolate color showed on sides, creating visual interest through contrast between dark cake and light frosting. Women competed to make the best German chocolate cake, with distinctions including moistest cake. These competitions created friendly rivalry that elevated church Christmas socials into showcases of baking skill. Carrot cake represented health-conscious church ladies adapting to 1970s nutrition awareness while maintaining indulgent desserts. This spice cake with vegetables cost $3 and fed 16 people with cake. Church ladies made carrot cake with grated carrots, crushed pineapple, and chopped nuts, creating moisture and texture that kept cake fresh for days, that was actually quite rich and caloric. The frosting had to be thick enough to hold shape, but soft enough to spread without tearing delicate cake. The addition of pineapple sparked debates. Purists claimed authentic carrot cake contained only carrots, while modernists argued that pineapple improved moisture and flavor. The debates revealed philosophical differences about authenticity versus improvement that extended beyond cake into church governance and theological interpretation. The theological concept of stewardship applied to ingredients meant that carrot cake aligned with Lutheran values about responsible resource use, that Christmas socials often featured multiple carrot cakes, creating opportunities for comparison and discussion about whose version tasted best. Tunnel of fudge cake represented the peak of 1960s church lady baking innovation. This bundt cake with fudgy center cost $4 and fed 16 people with cake that seemed magical. How did the fudge tunnel form during baking? The baking required precise timing, underbaked, and the entire cake was raw, overbaked, and the tunnel disappeared. The narrow window of perfect doneness meant that experienced bakers had advantage over beginners who lacked the instinct for proper timing. The cake had to cool completely in the pan before removal. Impatience meant collapsed cake and destroyed tunnel. This required restraint and patience, with the cooling taking several hours. The weight tested bakers who wanted immediate results, teaching the kind of patience that churches considered spiritual virtue. Episcopal women's guilds particularly favored tunnel of fudge cake because its sophistication and technical difficulty created natural hierarchy among bakers, with successful execution proving mastery that earned respect, extending beyond the kitchen into church leadership. Which of these 30 forgotten Christmas cakes did your church ladies make? Comment the cake name and your denomination. I'm mapping where these mid-century church baking traditions survived longest and which regions abandoned them first as convenience replaced commitment and store-bought desserts replaced homemade sacrifices. If you made it through all 30 cakes, you understand that church ladies weren't just baking. They were building empires of influence through flour and sugar, creating social hierarchies through technical mastery, and maintaining community bonds through shared labor that required genuine sacrifice of time, energy, and resources that modern life has taught us to protect rather than give freely. These women understood that church socials required more than just feeding people. They needed impressive presentations that announced the church's standards and values to visitors and members alike. They needed reliable recipes that worked consistently despite varying ovens, ingredients, and kitchen conditions. They needed cakes that sparked conversations lasting long after the last crumb was consumed, creating shared memories that bound communities together across decades and distances. But something valuable was lost when these cakes vanished from church fellowship halls. The community created through shared labor disappeared when women stopped gathering in church kitchens to bake together, sharing techniques and stories while their hands worked. The standards maintained through friendly competition evaporated when store-bought desserts eliminated the direct comparison that had driven excellence for generations. The connections between food, faith, and fellowship that made church central to social life weakened as convenience replaced commitment and entertainment options multiplied beyond church socials. The demonstration that care and commitment required time and effort, not just money and convenience, disappeared from a culture increasingly oriented toward efficiency and instant gratification that measured value in saved time rather than invested labor. We lost the understanding that some things worth having require sacrifice that seems disproportionate to modern sensibilities. That spending 3 days making cake for a 2-hour social wasn't inefficient. It was the entire point, that the effort itself communicated care in ways that purchased items never could, no matter how expensive or beautifully decorated. That creating community required investing time and labor that modern life has trained us to consider wasteful rather than valuable, outdated rather than admirable. We lost the knowledge embedded in these recipes, not just the measurements and techniques, but the understanding of how ingredients behaved, how ovens varied, how weather affected baking, how to adjust recipes based on available ingredients without written instructions. Church ladies carried this knowledge in their hands and heads, developed through decades of practice and passed down through demonstration rather than documentation. When they died without teaching their daughters, that embodied knowledge died with them, irreplaceable by any cookbook or video tutorial. We lost the social structures these cakes created and maintained, the hierarchies based on skill rather than wealth, the respect earned through consistent excellence, the connections between food, faith, and fellowship that made church central to social life weakened as convenience replaced commitment and entertainment options multiplied beyond church socials. The demonstration that care and commitment required time and effort, not just money and convenience, disappeared from a culture increasingly oriented toward efficiency and instant gratification that measured value in saved time rather than invested labor. It was the entire point that the effort itself communicated care in ways that purchased items never could, no matter how expensive or beautifully decorated. That creating community required investing time and labor that modern life has trained us to consider wasteful rather than valuable, outdated rather than admirable. We lost the knowledge embedded in these recipes, not just the measurements and techniques, but the understanding of how ingredients behaved, how ovens varied, how weather affected baking, how to adjust recipes based on available ingredients without written instructions. Church ladies carried this knowledge in their hands and heads, developed through decades of practice and passed down through demonstration rather than documentation. We lost the social structures these cakes created and maintained, the hierarchies based on skill rather than wealth, the leadership opportunities that opened to women who demonstrated mastery of complex techniques, the competitive drive that pushed women to develop new recipes and perfect existing ones, the collaborative relationships formed through shared labor. We lost the theological integration these cakes represented. Scripture cake teaching Bible navigation, devil's food cake sparking debates about engaging secular culture, red velvet's colors symbolizing Christ's sacrifice, angel food cake representing purity, fruitcake's alcohol content revealing denominational values. Every cake carried theological meaning that made dessert tables into statements of faith and practice, creating opportunities for religious education and discussion that seemed natural rather than forced. We lost the economic models these cakes demonstrated, the bulk purchasing that reduced costs, the seasonal planning that captured lowest prices, the preservation techniques that extended ingredient life. We lost the aesthetic standards these cakes maintained, the insistence on even layers and smooth frosting, the attention to color and presentation, the understanding that food should please the eye before it pleased the palate. These standards elevated church socials above mere feeding into aesthetic experiences that enriched lives and created beauty in communities that often lacked other sources of artistic expression. Subscribe for more forgotten food history that preserves the recipes, techniques, and traditions that defined how previous generations celebrated faith and community through food requiring genuine sacrifice. Next video covers 50 Depression-era Christmas foods that kept families celebrating despite poverty, the survival strategies that created Christmas joy from almost nothing, proving that celebration required determination more than prosperity. When you burn sugar for burnt sugar cake, you're accepting the risk of public failure that church ladies faced every time they attempted this challenging technique. When you grate fresh coconut until your fingers cramp for Japanese fruitcake, you're experiencing the physical sacrifice that church ladies considered normal rather than excessive. When you assemble 7-layer coconut cake without letting layers slide, you're developing the steady hands and patient focus that church ladies built through years of practice. These aren't just quaint old recipes from a bygone era we can safely ignore. They're evidence of a culture that valued skill and rewarded mastery, maintained standards and celebrated excellence, understood that effort itself communicated care in ways that purchased convenience never could. They're proof that caring for community required sacrifice that couldn't be purchased with money or shortcut through convenience, that excellence required practice and patience developed over years, and that creating genuine belonging required investing time and labor that modern life has trained us to consider wasteful rather than valuable, outdated rather than admirable. The women who made these cakes understood something profound that we're still struggling to relearn in our era of isolation and convenience. They understood that community doesn't happen accidentally. It requires intentional investment of time and effort. They understood that respect must be earned through demonstrated skill rather than demanded through position or wealth. They understood that tradition connects us to those who came before and those who will come after, creating continuity that gives life meaning beyond individual existence. They understood that food is never just food, it's communication, education, demonstration, and celebration combined into edible form. That the Lane cake's bourbon filling communicated theological flexibility, that the Lady Baltimore's sophistication announced social aspirations, that the scripture cake's verses taught biblical literacy, that the burnt sugar cake's difficulty demonstrated courage, that the Japanese fruitcake's exotic flavors showed worldliness. Every cake was a message, and church ladies were fluent in this culinary language that modern culture has largely forgotten. So, as you plan your next church Christmas social, consider adding 1 or 2 of these forgotten cakes to your dessert table. Not just for nostalgia, though that has genuine value in maintaining connection to the past, but because they work, because they're genuinely delicious, because they solve real challenges of feeding large groups, because they create conversations and memories that store-bought cakes never generate, and because making them connects you to rich traditions of church community that deserve to be remembered, celebrated, and continued into future generations. Share these recipes with your daughters and sons. Yes, sons, because the assumption that only women should bake is part of what killed these traditions when women's roles expanded beyond the kitchen. Teach the next generation that baking is gift rather than burden, that creating food for community is privilege rather than obligation, that investing time in making people feel valued through homemade food is choice worth making even when easier alternatives exist. Pass along the stories of church ladies who earned respect through baking skill, who built community through shared labor, who maintained standards through friendly competition, who created beauty in communities that often lacked other sources of aesthetic experience. Tell about the women who stood at hot stoves for hours, who beat egg whites until their arms ached, who spent 3 days making single cakes because they understood that the effort itself was the message they were sending to their communities. These 30 cakes carry forward a legacy of skill, dedication, and community commitment that defined church culture for generations. They teach us lessons that remain relevant regardless of whether we attend church. Lessons about the value of mastery, the importance of standards, the necessity of sacrifice for community. They remind us that some things worth having require effort that seems excessive until you experience the result, that excellence requires practice that seems tedious until you achieve mastery. These cakes prove that the best things in life can't be purchased or shortcut. You can't buy the respect that comes from mastering burnt sugar cake's 30-second timing window. You can't order the community bonds formed through beating egg whites side by side with other women. You can't download the satisfaction of successfully assembling a 12-layer cake that holds together through an entire church social. You can't subscribe to the belonging created when your Lane cake is recognized as the best version at the Christmas potluck. The church ladies who made these cakes understood what we're slowly relearning. That meaning comes from mastery, that respect must be earned through demonstrated skill, that community forms around shared labor rather than shared consumption, and that celebration requires investment of ourselves rather than just our money. They proved that 3 days spent making one cake wasn't waste, it was wisdom. That sore arms from beating egg whites weren't suffering. They were the price of excellence. That cramped fingers from grating coconut weren't punishment. That smoke-filled kitchens from burning sugar weren't inconvenience. These 30 cakes are their legacy, waiting to teach us what we forgot when we chose convenience over commitment, efficiency over excellence, and purchased desserts over invested labor.